Oh, you're
There I am. Ah, funny. Okay. Hi, guys. Welcome to Real Food Recovery. We are happy to be here. We have a special guest today. I'm not going to give it away. What I'm going to do is say hi to Jamie, check in with her, and I
Hi,
will let her share the big surprise. Hey, Jamie, how's it going?
we have today Molly Painschab is licensed clinical professional counselor and licensed addiction counselor. We are thrilled to have her here. We have had other members of the Sweet Sobriety team and Dr. Vera Tarman's Food Junkies podcast here, and we are so thrilled to have Molly in the new year as a co-founder of Sweet Sobriety, an innovative online platform dedicated to ultra-processed food addiction recovery. Molly provides resources, education, and support to individuals worldwide on their healing journey. Molly is also a prominent voice in the food addiction recovery space as co-host of the Food Junkies podcast that I just mentioned, an amazing tool for folks, a resource really for folks who might be maybe curious about their relationship with ultra processed food and food in general. And for those of us like Paige and myself who know that ultra processed food is something that we really do our very best to moderate at the worst and stay away from at best. We want to just thank Molly and Vera and her team for really bringing us such valuable insights, stories, and of course having real food recovery on that podcast as well. So the goal of the Food Junkies podcast is really to share information about food addiction treatment and recovery. And Molly also hosts another podcast, Food Shrinks Podcast, offering
Very
listeners
good.
evidence-based strategies and solutions for breaking free from the grip of ultra-processed foods. Paige shared her love of that podcast with me, Molly. Beyond her work with clients and media, Molly is actively involved in advocacy efforts for the recognition of food addiction as a legitimate diagnosis. Yes, that will be a happy day when we see that go into the DSM. And you also, it looks like you do some work with the WHO. So I would love to hear more about that. So Molly, let's dive in. Let's dive in there about the path that you're taking, and maybe the obstacles that you're facing around getting the recognition of the diagnosis or the recognition that it deserves of food addiction.
Yeah, sure. So that started back in 2021. We originally applied to the World Health Organization for the recognition of a diagnosis of food addiction. And it took them quite a while actually to send a rejection, which we took as a good sign that
Yeah,
like they really had to
on the
contemplate
radar.
and mull it over. And their rejection was actually pretty weak, but there were some very good points that we then have taken the last 3 years to really address. And now we are working on our response, which we will submit this year to that initial rejection. So one of the things that they talked about was that there was not consensus amongst professionals that this was a thing that even existed, which
Mhm.
is true. It's very hard actually to find consensus, but we did it. We took a year and we put together groups of people, researchers, academics, clinicians, medical doctors, from all different, perspectives, from endocrinologists to cardiovascular doctors to, psychiatrists, and clinicians in the field. And we came to consensus what we're going to call it, our new, we're responding with ultra processed food addiction, like the definition of it,
Right.
what research exists to back up that this is a thing, what research is still needed, all of that. So all of that to say that it's still a work in progress, and that's where we're working is with the World Health Organization. Ashley Gerhardt who wrote the Yale Food Addiction Scale, has her own team of people who has applied to the American Psychiatric Association to be recognized in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic
Right.
Statistical Manual, which is what we use in the US and Canada and Australia. A lot of nations actually use it to diagnose. And so she has a team doing that. And our team is just now at this point, like I said, we are responding to their initial rejection. And so the hope is that, between the two different
Or-
teams that are doing these things, the two different groups of people, that something somewhere along the line, we are going to get some movement. Yeah.
So how does the WHO's, let's say that they do accept this, would that be something where they have labeled it as an addiction and it's something that can now qualify for treatment, insurance, identification, and coding, all of that?
Yes and no. So it will be really interesting to see how that plays out. So we have seen where the World Health Organization has recognized something that the American Psychiatric Association has not. For example, sex addiction. The World Health Organization has recognized that, and there is a diagnostic code for it, but the American Psychiatric Association has not recognized that yet formally in the DSM. So whether or not that's being covered by insurance, I couldn't tell you. In the US, most likely not, because they want the APA code, not the WHO code when it comes to like submitting to insurance. It becomes pretty complicated. And then there's like often, you need to then have a team of people who can like have that like conversation back and forth with the insurance provider as to whether or not it's going to be covered. It's kind of a mess that way. So there's no guarantee if one over the other. However, it's more likely if it's recognized by the APA, just because that's what we use as clinicians to diagnose. Yes.
Thank you.
How do you feel about the term food addiction? Because I ask that because there is such a big conversation around, some people feel like it's punitive and invites shame, where other people like me feels like it gives me guardrails and direction and safety. And I was actually grateful for the label because then I knew what to do with what I had. So, but some people feel like that is a really negative term. So what's your look on that?
It's so interesting because language really matters. Language matters. And from a therapist's point of view, I want to use whatever language the person in front of me is using. So if somebody says food addiction is is a term that works for me, I'm going to use that language with them in the treatment of, right? And if somebody says, yeah, that doesn't resonate for me, we're going to find different language. Now, I come from the world of substance use disorder, mental health, all of that. So when I first started in this field, we used like diagnoses were chemical dependency. We don't use that term anymore. We use substance use disorder because it's person-centered, it's client-centered, and it takes some of that argument, like we've argued that shaming language can be something like addiction, can be shaming, because it was seen as a moral issue for so long that, so addiction isn't even actually like a clinical term when we think about diagnosis. So if somebody were to come to me today and I was going to diagnose food addiction, my guess is, and I believe this is where Ashley's team has gone, is that it's something like ultra processed food use disorder.
Yeah.
Because it makes it more medical, like everybody wants it to be in this medical model. It makes it more medical. It lines up with that. So I think that if we get caught up in what are we going to call it on a formal level, now we're back in that non-consensus place, and big food wins, big pharma wins, like big insurance wins, everybody else wins, and not the person who's in front of me who actually needs the help. So I rather just go with whatever it is that's going to get me what I need.
Yeah, which makes sense. And regardless of what we call it, the treatment is always the same.
Correct.
So, and I have often used, trying to stay politically correct, recovering from the effects of ultra processed food. That seems to be palatable for everybody. So I'm just trying to find the right one. Like I said, I label myself a food addict, or especially a sugar addict. It doesn't shame me because I know I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just reacting as my body was designed to react to a drug that tastes really, really good. And I love to have more of it, and I'd love to have it every day. So anyway, yeah, thank you for sharing your insight on that. I was just really curious what you had to say about it. I'll let Jamie turn it over to Jamie.
So when I came, before we started recording, I came in the virtual room here, and Molly was sharing some statistics around, I assume, recovery populations.
Yes.
Share with that.
Yeah. So we were just talking about, so what we know is that not all treatment is right for all people. Not everybody, I think, right, like, what do we do with the people that we're not able to help? Like, what is that about? And so what I was talking about is that I am going to go out on a limb, and I don't have any like research literature to back me up on this aspect of it, but working in the substance use disorder field, we knew, 33 was the number, like that's kind of how we looked at it. 33% of people will decide, I'm putting it down and I'm never picking it up again. Right. So think about, everybody has that story, I feel like, of like the grandpa or the great uncle or somebody who just decided one day, I'm not smoking cigarettes anymore. And that was it. And I'm never doing it again. Okay. I would also argue that you're going to see those same people, about 20% of people who are in 12-step rooms meet that 33% criteria.
Light switch.
Yeah. Where they're just like, well, here I am, putting it down, light switch, never doing that again.
Light switch, not dimmer. Then you got the dimmer switch.
It's over. Yeah. Yeah. So then the middle 33% is pick it up, put it down, pick it up, put it down, pick it up, put it up, pick it up, put it down, until they finally put it down. And research out of Harvard from John Kelly on his work with alcohol use disorder shows us that it can take 7 years for a person to get 1 year of abstinence.
Yes.
So that would be that middle 33%, right? Where like there's a lot of trial and error, but it's not all for naught, right? They're not like, oh, who cares, whatever. No, they're actively trying. Okay. It's just taking, for whatever reason, a lack of resources, a lack of support, whatever, to get there. And then there's the final 33 where they will use until the day they die, they're incarcerated, or something happens that forces them to stop. And so, so the truth is that we don't know where we fall in the 33%. Chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, one of my podcasts, whatever, you're at least in the middle 33. Right. Right. And so, but what that tells us is that there's hope. You're still working toward it. You still believe in yourself, and that there is an answer, or that there are answers and solutions out there for you, and you haven't stopped looking.
And that makes total sense. And that's also been what I've seen, so I'm a coach and life and outside of sort of healthy lifestyle, I do, all kinds of leadership coaching. And typically you can get about 85%, 84% of people, you can get them to make some change, right? If they're self-aware and willing, they can make change. And there's about 16% of an average, sample size population that is going to be challenged, right? They're going to be challenged with some mental illness. They're going to be challenged with some, just lack of self-awareness, lack of empathy, maybe maybe they're showing up with some neurodivergence that just makes it very difficult for them to respond to any kind of coaching, any kind of behavior change. But in this realm, in this recovery realm, to basically double, right? Two plus times that number, it kind of throws my coaching brain for a loop, because I'm like, wait a second, like, you're not totally lacking self-awareness. You're not struggling with maybe a undiagnosed or diagnosed mental illness that sort of keeps you stuck in the food. Like, you've got the skills, but what they don't have is the resources, the support system. They're not willing to ask for the help.
Right.
And again, so I think what complicates this kind of recovery, and I noticed the 33%, that mimics alcohol use recovery as well.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. And I would say, I think the thing that we have to remember is, with substance use disorder, I have never worked with an individual in 20 years. I've never worked with an individual with substance use disorder that didn't also have a comorbid mental health concern, and not necessarily substance use disorder induced.
That's right.
Right. So chicken or the egg, it doesn't really matter. But what I'm seeing is, like, so when it comes to substance, you think about like just general population. Yes, those statistics are what they are, but then you do substance use, and it's like, okay, is there mental health concern? Is there food insecurity? Do they even have access to food? Like healthy, what we might consider healthy foods, like maybe it's a food desert, not just insecurity. Do they have stable housing? Are they right now in LA in the fires? All of those things contribute to this. And so if we as clinicians show up and say, you just don't have the willingness, or you lack self-awareness, and that's why you're not getting better, we are contributing to the problem. We have to consider all of these factors that go into it and know that it's not them. We need to change our approach. They don't have to change, like, you know what I mean? Like, they obviously have changes.
They're showing up the way that they're showing.
They are showing up. That tells me they still hold hope. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very well said.
And I tell people, so I'm thinking about how you're talking about, I've heard the statistics that it takes 7 years to get a clean year. And so my mantra has always been to people that we work with is your number one job is to not give up. Because every day you get under your belt, you're getting closer and closer to that 7 years. So, and it does take time. But as we're talking about these percentages, the last group, the last 33 and the last 33, those people are all still using, right? So that would lead me to say there is some common struggles that people are still having. 66% are still struggling with the ultra processed food in our addiction. So do you find that there is one common thing that sticks out above others that makes being sober with the ultra processed food more difficult and more challenging than something else? I mean, is there one common thread that really jumps out, and what's the solution for it?
Yeah. And this could be, I mean, take this with a grain of salt. This could be just because of the clients that we attract. But for me, it's trauma. Trauma is a common theme, and neurodivergence, which trauma causes neurodivergence as well. Exactly. But I think the other thing that we have to remember is ADHD and substance use disorder often go hand in hand, because ADHD has to do with a lack of dopamine production in the brain. And so the brain is literally seeking the thing that it needs. So, you know, I think like along those lines, at least in the populations that we work with, I would say trauma. Yeah, and not necessarily big T. It can be little t, complex, cumulative, all of that.
Yeah, we all react differently to trauma. Little t trauma can be big T trauma in some people.
That's right. Exactly.
On how they're wired. And we're going to have a specialist, somebody that you guys interviewed on soon, that talks a lot about the ADHD and the correlation to food addiction. I think that's a fascinating topic and answers a lot of my own personal questions.
Right. I know Clarissa felt the same, but when it comes to like, what is the solution to that? I think, you know, it is about practicing through a trauma-informed lens. Now, as a mental health provider and having worked in corrections and sexual assault and with child protective services and all of that, like, to me, that just makes sense. But I know that when people are new to the field, and I'm talking to like, you know, like babies in the field of food addiction, especially when you're coming from your own personal experience and maybe you don't have the master's degree in mental health and whatever. And I'm not trying to say like you don't still have a place and you shouldn't be doing what you're doing, but I think it is really important to like go and learn about that. Because when we don't come from a trauma-informed place, potentially we are traumatizing our clients. So, you know, I would say like overall, when we can have unconditional positive regard and just compassion for the person in front of us and meet them where they are, we are going to get so much further with that person, even if they continue to still binge or eat the thing that, you know, they don't want to be eating, whatever it might be. If we can hold space and hope, they can too, right? Like it's like a co-regulation thing almost, and they keep trying and they keep trying. And then like you were saying, Paige, like the 7 years, like it takes time, but they're not giving up.
Right. That's it. You can only get to the 7 years if you don't give up.
Don't give up.
Right. And we tell people too, we don't have to start with the food. We can start anywhere that you need to start. We need to start with what's killing you most right now. So whatever that is, then we'll start there, and the food will flush itself out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Turn it over to you.
So when I think about what really stands out to me on this journey into recovery, I have many clients, and even in my own self-awareness, I've been realizing and seeing that this label or diagnosis around eating disorder, right? Around this sort of umbrella diagnosis of eating disorder, That's something that, I've heard practitioners and researchers talk about. Eating disorder is as silly as saying that a smoker has a breathing disorder, right? And I see some validity to that in some ways, but what is your take on that terminology of eating disorders, and how do you work with people that come to you with sort of this understanding and this label?
Well, I think I think first I like to clarify that food addiction or ultra processed food addiction or ultra processed food use disorder, whatever label it's going to get, is actually a substance use disorder. And eating disorders fall under like emotional behavioral. They are their own. It's literally called eating and feeding disorder. Like it's its own thing, where when we're talking about food addiction in the simplest terms, the mechanism, once we hit that place of quote diagnosis, the mechanism is beyond whatever. There is something that is taking over once that substance is introduced into our body, that those pathways have been, changed literally because of that substance, and that there's no amount of thinking, rationalizing whatever ourselves out of it once it starts. The best hope once we've ingested again is that we stop as soon as we can to course correct.
Mm-hmm. So one is that the mental behaviors, and the other one is the physical substance reactions in our bodies, on our minds,
right?
Chemical responses of these substances as they interact with our chemistry.
Yes, and the other stuff absolutely applies. Absolutely.
Yes.
But it's like that, the first mechanism, like when we're talking about like, what is the crocodile closest to our life raft? Like, what is the thing that's killing us? It's so like, that's going to be the thing that, right? Like we absolutely are going to have issues if we're ingesting that thing all over again, where the emotional aspect of things, and this is why treatment for eating disorders is different than treatment for food addiction, because in a food addiction treatment program or treatment plan, we're going to look at what are those things that are lighting up your brain like a Christmas tree, and can we actively remove them so that you are not ingesting them, so that your brain is not lighting up in that way, and now you're binging or you're purging or you're restricting because of fear, all of those things. So eating disorder like behaviors show up in food addiction. This is part of the argument, is this its own identifiable disorder? And the answer is yes, but just like most other mental health diagnoses, there are crossover symptoms. Just like with any other substance use disorder, there are crossover symptoms. So part of the research needed is that we work really hard to show how this is different. Now, food addiction is most closely related to cigarettes, alcohol, and to caffeine. So caffeine, nicotine, alcohol. And I know that there's a lot of talk of like, it's just like heroin, it's just like cocaine. And as a person who has worked with clients with substance use disorder around those substances, with clients who have died due to substance use disorder with those substances, it's really painful for me to hear, because sometimes I feel like that's fear mongering. I feel like it's shaming. And if it's somebody's lived experience of like, well, I've used heroin and I've been a heroin addict, and I've used sugar and I've been a sugar, and that's how they want to describe it, I'm going to like, again, be there with them.
Meet them where they are, right?
But when people who have literally had no experience with that whatsoever spew that information, it's fear mongering, and that's noise. And then it can make people really afraid. And then now we have a whole new host of problems as clinicians who are treating this, right? Because now we have to like re-educate, like, actually, that's not accurate, whatever, like just the mechanisms are different, all of the things. And I'm not saying that it's not a big problem, and I'm not saying it's not its own important problem that we need to look at and address, but I really, really, really want people to know and understand that if you are eating sugar and you can't stop, no, you are not, like, it's not the same as heroin use disorder. Not only that, I feel like it paints a picture of people with substance use disorder around things like methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, that are just not true. When they're like, I'm a gutter bottom addict, whatever, like, it hurts my heart, because people who live under bridges and who panhandle it, they are still human beings and they still deserve love and compassion and respect. And you do too, And so I guess I just want to dispel some of that as well, as far as when we're talking about how does this like kind of line up with other substance use disorders, statistically speaking, but also treatment speaking. Treatment speaking, I am going to have a different treatment plan for the person who's trying to get off foods than the person who's trying to get off meth.
Perfect.
Period. Because meth, we know what meth is. I can look at it on a table and say, that's absolutely meth. But we can put all the foods in the world on a table, and we cannot look at that table and know what is a drug food, quote unquote drug food, for
Right.
any
Exactly.
individual
For any
person.
individual. It's very individual.
And so
And
that is a big distinction in what we're talking about here in treating all of this. Yeah.
well said.
Interesting. I love this conversation. And going back to what you were saying, no matter what the addiction is, it sounds like trauma is a part of every addiction for most people. And so what if, I'm going to use myself for an example. I had a pretty normal childhood, no major big T traumas. I mean, just the normal, within the range of normal stuff. But for me, what I think happened to me was just repeated exposure from the moment my eyeballs opened into this world. And I said, ooh, mama I want some more of that. Give me some more of that. And it's, every birthday party, every holiday, every get together, every Sunday dinner, everything. If you think about that from your earliest exposure, your entire life, I think my addiction is more from just repeated exposure. So I don't know if there's
That's a
statistics
thing.
out there that say it's more likely trauma versus just repeated exposure. And you were talking about those neural pathways, talk about deeply embedded. And now every single event I go to, I'm fighting that ding, it's
Yeah.
time for more dessert
Yeah.
because it's
No,
Sunday.
right. Yeah. No, I don't know that there is, and maybe there is. But I think the person that I meet, again, in 20 years of doing this, no matter what substance use disorder it is, the person who meets the criteria based on exposure initially only is the exception, not the rule.
Okay. That's what I wondered.
Anecdotally speaking.
Mhm.
Anecdotally speaking. Now, and keep in mind too, like substance use disorder rates are between 10 to 15% of the population. So you also have to remember that like we again, just falling into that statistic, we are the exception, not the rule. So there are going to be exceptions right within that as well. So as you imagine, like that gets smaller and smaller.
Smaller and smaller,
But
yeah.
we can see it in the cigarette stuff, like I was just telling Paige before you got on, Jamie, my stepdad is currently on hospice and I'm basically just waiting for the call to get on the road. But here's a man who's 79 years old, end stage COPD, on oxygen, and was smoking up until the day he went into the hospital right before Christmas. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
As we're in the hospital talking to him, he is telling us stories about being 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, rolling cigarettes and smoking them in a small house where they're just like, now it's just filled with smoke, right? So yes, talk about exposure. You're right. Like, so again, like I think there are those people where it's exposure. And then it makes that, it gives the dopamine hit, it soothes us, it does all of the things. And now it's deeply learned, right? There's that deeply learned thing, because dopamine is not just responsible for pleasure, it's also responsible for motivation and learning things. You are now motivated to do it again because it has learned, oh, that feels good.
Right.
Oh, that gives me a break. Oh, that whatever,
Right.
So I think that there are definitely exceptions to the rule, and please know that even if you didn't experience trauma and you're saying this is my issue, please, you don't have to be a certain level of quote sick in order to get help. Like if you want help, there is help for you. just start asking questions, just start reaching out, start talking to people, consultations. I'm sure you guys give free consultations. We give free consultations. Like, we just want to like make sure people get to the places that are going to be the most helpful for them,
And
regardless of
that's
if
what,
it's trauma or not.
yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you is that where you tell people to start, is garnering information, or where do you usually start with people on the recovery path to start leaning into some change here?
Yeah.
What's step one for them?
Yeah. So if they're already like, yep, we want to work with you for whatever reason, maybe they've done a consultation with one of us, or they, they're just for sure, they're joining group or whatever. Where we start is not necessarily get more information. A lack of information is not what got you here. Right. There's all kinds of information out there. It's not about a lack of information. This is, if it's addiction, it's addiction, which means like you are literally not in control of what's happening in your brain.
Yeah.
So for us, it's whatever is going on with the person in front of us. So sometimes that person is like, I'm here, I know it's a problem, but I'm not ready to let go of these things. Okay, perfect. You're not ready to let go of these things yet. Maybe we can start looking at crowding it out. So maybe we can have a goal of just having vegetables at 1 meal a day, or 2 meals a day if you're already doing one. Maybe it's about making sure you're getting in 8 glasses of 8 ounces of water a day. Not because that's like some guideline that we should all be following. That just happens to be their goal. So like, are there little things that we can do that start crowding out the other things, or that are increasing health markers, adaptive behaviors, even if the other ones are still occurring, so that might be where we start. Or we might start with like, okay, can we just let go of the drive-through? Can we just let go of the whatever?
Right.
And so really we just start with wherever that person is. We have people who come in from day one and they're like, I'm absolutely cold turkey going 100% cold turkey abstinent. Okay, let's support you in that. And we have the other people who are like, I'm here, I know it's an issue, and I'm not ready to give up anything. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, that's okay. You're welcome here too. And our community is so beautiful. They take everybody on and loves them exactly as they are and supports them exactly where they are. Yeah.
Do you find the small changes work a little better than? Do you encourage people to go?
Yes. So they hear me all the time. So if any of our clients are listening, they're gonna be like, oh, here goes Molly. But I always tell them there is no need to jump headfirst into the shallow end of the pool, because you are not going to stick with it. What we know, I am an expert in behavior change. This is what I worked in corrections, for goodness sakes. Like, I'm telling you right now, huge changes, too many changes, all of those things. We can all be on our quote best behavior for a certain amount of time, but we're usually doing it out of fear, out of whatever.
Yeah.
And we're going to lose steam, because it's like, what's the payoff? What is the payoff? I don't have actual buy-in to it. So when we do these small incremental changes that people actually have buy-in with, and we practice a lot of self-compassion in our community, we practice a lot of self-determination in our community, those little changes snowball. And pretty soon you have people going like, I know I just said last week I was going to add more water, but this week I'm totally giving up the bread. You're like, I didn't even ask for that, but cool, let's do that. Let's do that. Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing.
I love that. So this reminds me of, and I'm down in Texas, and I went with some friends to a nutrition seminar. I shudder when I hear that sort of phrase sometimes, because I never know what to expect. And this nutrition seminar was put on by a local doctor and his team. And of course, their intention was excellent, right? They're like, hey, let's get folks like aware of some of the ways that food can heal, or food can make us sick. And so they gave a lot of information, right? It was them sort of talking to a group, to a large group, probably 50 people. So there was no real way for them to necessarily meet each individual where they were at, and I get it, but I was alarmed, because at one point it was kind of like I was looking around the room, looking at some of the other attendees, and they were in their best intentions, right? This physician and his team were trying to give so much information about what not to do and what to avoid, and don't eat this and don't eat that because this is what happens to you. And did you know that the lining of a can is filled with, and it was good intentions, but it would turn out to be extremely fear-mongering. And I could tell by the end of the hour and a half, these attendees were like they're paralyzed. They were paralyzed. And my heart hurt because I know that like you mentioned, I know the heart of the physician and the team that he has, and they really want to help people. And I also think that the way that they were going about it was really just kind of creating a lot of confusion. And I also feel like I have thought about this a lot this week since this seminar. There's so much confusion out there in the world of food. So much confusion, which
not just food.
Well, that's the truth. And some might say that confusion is, some might say that the confusion is sort of bred on purpose. Just like in big tobacco, at the very end of the big tobacco, the height of it, that confusion was what kept people sort of hooked on cigarettes until the government did something. And in our case, we're past that point. And even the things that are good for us, there's so much. Well, what about this? And what about that?
Mm-hmm.
How do you long ramp up here, but how do you work with members of your community, people out in the world that you talk to, that come to you with all of these things that they've heard that are utterly contradictory?
Right. Yeah. So I want to preface this with, I spent all 4 years of my high school career being a policy debater. So I learned, and then I went into my undergraduate is actually in poli-sci. So I spent 8 years of my life, back to back, literally learning, researching, doing all of those things that no matter what the argument was, no matter what the stated quote fact or whatever was, that there was always research literature that would back up both sides of the argument.
Right.
Okay. So I just want to get that out there. So ultimately how we do it, or how I specifically do it, whether I'm working with somebody individually or in group, is I tell everybody it's all noise. It's all noise. It doesn't matter who's right, who's wrong. It doesn't freaking matter. It's all noise. Food Junkies is noise. Food Shrinks is noise. This is noise. I'm noise sitting in front of you. It's all noise. And so what we do is we teach people how to have self-determination, how to use critical thinking skills, how to know if it works for you. Right. So eggs is a huge controversial thing for whatever reason. Eggs are controversial. I'm like, it's just food. That's actual food. It's just food. But there's all this controversy. So I rather ask the person, do eggs work for you or not? And they're like, yeah, they work for me. I'm like, then does it matter what? No, that's right. Move on. Something else. It is too much energy for you to worry back and forth. Who's right, who's wrong? Is this going to kill me? Is this not? None of us are getting out of this life alive. So let's just go back to critical thinking and self-determination. If this works for me, if this feels good, if this moves me closer to my preferred future self, do it.
Do it.
I love that.
Love it.
What is stopping you? And oftentimes if you ask what is, it's like that fear of perfection, fear of getting it wrong. So then perfection. Right. And then it's like, okay, well, if we're going to let perfection get in the way of good enough, we are going to be frozen. We are going to feel like no matter what I do, I'm going to do it wrong. So now what happens is now we've given our power away, and now we're vulnerable to diet culture vultures. Now we're vulnerable to the high pressure sales tactics that can happen in our industry because it is so closely tied to weight often with people, not always, but often. And so when we do that, when we back ourselves into a corner, we are setting ourselves up for vulnerability to some of these, to even just more, I guess. And so that would be my message is it's all noise. Come back to here. If you put 1 or 2 hands on your heart and you take some nice, big, deep regulating breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth, you do it a couple times, you will feel your nervous system come from this heightened state back into your body. Just quiet down and ask yourself, what do I need right now? Or what is my truth? Or what actually lands for me? That is going to be a more true and real answer. And you're more likely to stick with it. Because it is self-determined. Somebody has not shown up and told you what to do with your life.
Yeah. Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huge. A follow-up question to that, and this is something that Paige and I talk about openly, and we've talked about privately outside of the podcast, but we are as someone progresses through their recovery years, right? They accumulate years of recovery. And it doesn't matter about abstinence or as far as when I say years of recovery, it could just mean that they were getting more aware, more self-aware, more connected to their needs. Do you find that they're as they progress in recovery, that their needs change, or that their the way that they engage with food changes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a big fan of reminding everybody, just because somebody is abstinent does not mean that they have recovery, and not everybody in recovery is abstinent, and that is okay. You do not have to be abstinent to be working on your recovery. So yes, absolutely. In recovery, recovery is about growth. It's about learning where skills are needed to use tools, or maybe I don't even have a tool, let alone the skill to use those tools. Or maybe I haven't emotionally developed certain areas of my life because of past life, experiences, whatever it might be, or earlier life experiences, I should say, not necessarily past life experiences. That's a whole different animal.
Podcast.
That's a different podcast. That's not this one. So yes, the whole thing is like, you're supposed to change. You are supposed to outgrow these things. So we see that all the time. We have people who, have been with us for many years, and they initially came to us and they were seeing us multiple times a week in group. And then pretty soon, they're like, maybe now they're also seeing us individually every once in a while. So now their group time has diminished because they're getting support because of one-on-ones. And now one-on-ones are starting to go down, and they're coming to group once a week, and maybe they're seeing us once every couple of weeks, once every 3 weeks. People are supposed to grow. If we are keeping people stuck and sick because we're saying this is never over and you're always going to need this, that's problematic. I'm not saying it's not a lifelong thing and you're not going to need support for the rest of your life, but programs should be giving you the tools to start doing the stuff for yourself. And then you come back, right? It's like touch points. You come back and you get your yearly checkup or whatever it might be. You go get your vaccination, or however you want to look at that. Whatever you need to get your bump, your boost to keep going. But yes, you're supposed to change and grow. And over time, yes, relationship with food does change 100%. Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's so interesting, because I have found, as I've aged and changed, what might work for me at one point may not work for me later on. I was doing a reel recently for our social media, and the topic was exactly what you were just explaining about self-discovery. And I was talking about, what's the right food plan for you? The right food plan for you is the one that's right for you. Whether it's vegan or carnivore, whatever it is, there is no right, perfect food plan for every single person on the planet of this earth at the exact same time. So I love that you brought that up. One more question that I wanted to try and get in is that we know that we are saturated with cues and triggers, and in a world that, unfortunately, this is the one addiction where we do still have to continue to eat. So that makes it the hardest addiction of all. And what do you say to people? Because we decided that the best tool, the best advice is to not give up. I think we all agreed on that a little earlier, but you're going to have setbacks. You're going to have lapses. You're going to have binges. What do you tell people to keep them motivated to not give up when they feel like they are swimming upstream every single day, especially in the beginning?
Yeah. So I like to remind everybody that you can be doing everything right and snapback still happens.
Yeah.
So I think about, if we're thinking about this from a medical or a disease model, people can be doing all the right things and their diabetes number, like their blood sugar numbers, can still go, through the roof. Cancer can return. Asthma can get worse, whatever, when we think about some of these other chronic conditions. So I just want to remind everybody, you can be doing everything right and snapback can still happen. Secondly, I find that the people who struggle the most with that, like, oh, I failed, are the individuals who put a lot of value in perfection, which often looks like numbers on a scale, numbers on a calendar, how many consecutive days, minutes, seconds, weeks, whatever. Yes. When there's some sort of quantitative whatever attached to it. Now, right, wrong, or indifferent, I'm not judging it. I'm just saying anecdotally, this is what I see. And so the problem with, I think that has great value as far as like, if you're a person that uses that to motivate yourself. The problem becomes that kind of motivation doesn't actually line up with life, like what we like actual living life. If you lived in a controlled environment, if you were in a vacuum, if you were whatever, that might be amazing. But because life happens and life gets really lifey, and emotions and stressors and those things have very real biological impacts, which then impact the food thing. Again, we're letting perfection get in the way of good enough. Right.
Exactly.
And so the way, it's like, we're right here. So this is what I was talking about with self-compassion. We are huge on self-compassion in our community, because self-compassion is literally the antidote to shame. And shame is the thing that will keep us stuck and sick. So self-compassion has two parts. It has like a tender side that says, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that happened. Of course that happened. You were sad, you were stressed, you were whatever. Of course you feel that way. And then it has that ferocious or fierce side that steps up and says, now, what are you going to do about it? It's mama bear. What is the corrective action? How do we get you back on course as quickly as possible? Not with judgment. We're not beating ourselves up. We're not saying, oh, you stupid, blah, 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 right? Like, just imagine all the negative things that one could say to themselves. We're not going there. You are not bullying my friend. You're not bullying my client. Like, I will say this to people, I'm sorry, but I won't allow you to bully my friend in front of me. And people are like, whoa, what? And I'm like, yeah, sorry, we're not going there. I'm not afraid to call that out, and here's the thing, we're going to do it with compassion. What do you need to do right now, or in the next few seconds, or in the next 24 hours that will course correct you? Even if it's a tiny thing. And they might just say like, oh, the next meal that I eat needs to be what I planned. Or if I didn't have a plan, I'm going to plan that out right now with the support of you as an individual, or maybe it's in the group. I'm going to tell you right now, this is what I'm going to have, because I have all of those things in my house. And I don't have to leave, so it is about that self-compassion piece. If you are a person who finds that you can get a few days at a time, and then you're, right back in the food in one way or another, self-compassion, absolutely. But remember that there is that course corrective side of it, the fierce side that says, okay, that happened. What are you going to do about it? What, right? Don't give your power away. Take your power back. You didn't have control because the food has the substances in it that are literally changing your brain. You did not have control. You have control now. You've woken up, maybe you're hours late, whatever. What can you do now to course correct and move forward?
Beautiful way, beautiful reminder, right? To look at both sides of self-compassion, right? So many people think self-compassion is just the one part, right?
Yeah.
Just that self-love, that self-acceptance. And that can turn into, if we're not, in my experience, right? When I would have that kind of self-talk, sometimes that turned into a little bit of self-pity. If if it sort of would kind of creep that way, or self-indulgence, or a little bit of babying, where it's like, well, part of being compassionate is giving yourself a break, right? So that
Yes.
it's funny, at least for me, it's funny how my mind can go there. So thank you for Molly, for joining us and for enlightening us. This has been exceptionally helpful. I think I probably am maybe putting words in Paige's mouth, but I doubt it. We'd love to have you back. We'd love to have you back. I don't think I'm speaking for Paige out of turn. So you really are a very,
gift.
very educated expert on this field. It's been a joy to talk to you and to learn from you. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm super honored, and I hope that even just one person listening to this maybe hears something that they need to hear, and they're a little, nicer to themselves a bit, or they heard something that maybe helps them get 3 days instead of 2, or whatever. If it just helps one person, I'm so happy to do it.
Beautiful. Perfect way to end. And if you want to find out more about us, you can find us at realfoodrecovery4u.com. That's the number 4 and the letter U. Hope to see you there, guys. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.